All
Amen.
right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here for our Torah cycle, the Torah portions. We did not get together last week because of many people were observing Thanksgiving with family and friends, and so we didn't get together last week. So essentially, if you'd like, we're going to cover two Torah portions, which one is Toldot and the other is Vayetzei. And that takes us from Genesis 25:19 to 32:3, which is a ginormous portion, and it's also a fantastic portion. You know how I feel about trying to cover Torah portions by themselves, but when you have two of them to cover, it's just astonishing. So, and it's also our midrash this evening, and as we are wont to do, we will get together and do our midrash. But I also want to give you a heads up regarding our midrash. We do the midrash, which is everyone gets to share their ideas, share their studies, share their insights into the Word, and tell us what they have discovered. Now, normally that's a free-for-all, and you can talk about whatever you want. However, during this time that we're in the Torah portions, and I mentioned this in the email that went out on Wednesday, I'm going to ask you to try to stay focused on the Torah portion. If you have something to share, make sure it's related to the Torah portion, just because it's so much material and I can't really cover all of it. So whatever you have to share on Family Midrash night is going to be a real blessing, I think. So as you prepare to share, I want to just remind you of that, and then I want to remind you of the principle that we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, which talks about the edification. Let all be done for the edification of the congregation. And so I want you to make sure that because we have a lot of people, and I love to hear from everybody, I want you to remember to share your insights in as few words as possible. Brevity is the soul of wit, as they say. And then also try to make sure, if you can, to share how your insight is applicable to our lives. Try as much as you can to make it applicable, make it practical, make it good and useful information to strengthen, to encourage, to correct whatever is needed at the moment. So when you're ready to share, please do try to do that. So that should be a good blessing for everybody. So in order to get us started for today, because we have such a large Torah portion, I know that many of you, hopefully all of you, have been reading your Torah portions. I don't know if you were aware of this, but I discovered this years ago, and I just wanted to share it with you. Now take this with a grain of salt. It's a resource, but it's not an awesome one, but it can be kind of cool. If you just do a Google search for Torah portion Toldot, for example, you'll find that Wikipedia actually has pretty extensive commentary on every single Torah portion. In fact, the Wikipedia entry for each Torah portion actually has the Torah portion broken down for every day of the week. And you can actually see how the Orthodox basically break down the whole Torah portion and break it into sections for reading one little portion of it every day. And you'll get lots of interesting connections. Now, I obviously don't rely on Wikipedia, but if you're trying to just gain some basic information about the Torah portion, it's not a bad place to start, just to get some familiarity. And I also, I'll stop there. I think that it's an interesting resource. Check it out at your peril, but check it out. It's interesting. Now, what I want to do this evening briefly is just to get us started. I want to just point out with a brief review what happened in our Torah portions for the last 2 weeks, or this week at last. So we have Torah portion Toldot, which deals with Isaac and Rebekah giving birth. Well, Rebekah giving birth. Isaac contributed. to the birth of Jacob and Esau. And these children wrestled in her womb, and then she goes to inquire of Yah and says, hey, what's the problem here? I got these children having a war inside me. Also very prophetic right there. So Isaac and Rebekah have Jacob and Esau. Then we have a brief description of the character and the spirit of these two boys. And that's always a huge discussion point for that Torah portion, is the nature and the character and the spirit of both Jacob and Esau. And I have a few preliminary comments that I'll make myself this evening regarding Jacob and Esau. Next, Jacob acquires the birthright by basically taking advantage of his brother when he's hungry because his appetites are tremendous. He trades the birthright for a bowl of soup, as you recall. Isaac sojourns in Gerar and redigs the wells of his father. Fascinating insights to be gleaned there. Yah appears to Isaac to reaffirm this covenant that was made with Abraham. Notice also that in the next Torah portion, Yah will appear to Jacob to reaffirm the covenant that was made with Abraham. So all three of the patriarchs have this covenant established and reaffirmed. Esau marries the daughters of the land of Canaan, decides that wasn't a great idea, and goes and marries one of Esau's daughters. So he's got 3 wives at minimum. That was not an excellent strategy. Rebekah schemes with Jacob for the blessing.
Did you mean Ishmael? One of Ishmael's daughters?
Yes, I apologize. Yes, you are correct. Ishmael. Who did I say? Esau, sorry. Yes, sorry about that. Ishmael. Rebekah hatches a plot to get the blessing for her son Jacob, and he decides to take part in this fiasco of playing dress up. Jacob does receive the blessing of his father Isaac. Esau receives essentially what appears to be a curse from his father. It's like, yeah, you're not getting anything. That's not a good thing. And then Isaac sends Jacob away to Padan Aram for a bride. And of course, Rebekah also has an ulterior motive for sending her son away, because she knows that her other son is going to kill him if he doesn't flee for his life. And then we come to Torah portion Vayetzei, and he sent. Okay, so now Jacob visits on his way out of town Hamakom in the Hebrew, the place. This is the same exact phrase that was used when Abraham was told by Yah, go to the place. And there lift up your son, the son that you love. Lift him up. Okay, so this is how the rabbis have suggested that this place where Jacob saw the ladder coming down from heaven and he put a rock in or around his head, something like that. This is the place, Hamakom. It's most likely where they would build the temple later. In fact, he says this is the house of El. Okay, so this is likely where the temple would be built later, where his own father had almost been offered up. So we have the stone and Jacob and the ladder, which there's some tremendous wisdom and insights and curious things about the stone. And we have an anointed stone, a Mashiach stone. We have a ladder, which is somehow in the Hebrew referred to as a he. A strange thing. The angels of Yah are going up and down on this ladder. Do you remember Yeshua talking to the Hebrew of Hebrews, in whom there is no guile? He says, if you believe because I said I saw you under the fig tree, wait until you see the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. It's a direct reference to the ladder of Jacob. So what does that signify? Well, likely it signifies that Yeshua, that's why the ladder is referred to in Hebrew as a he. It's not an it, it's a he. And there's that Yeshua is the conduit between heaven and earth. So there's some really key insights that are just tremendous right there. Yah appears to Jacob at this point to reaffirm this covenant that was made with his father, or with his grandfather. Jacob does anoint this stone and makes a vow, a silly kind of vow. Yah says, I'll be with you and I will not leave you until I have accomplished what I told you I would accomplish. And of course, Jacob says, that's awesome. If you'll do that, I'll give you 1/10 of everything I have. It's a great bargain. Never mind that God owns everything that he has. Jacob does strike a deal when he gets to Padanaram for a bride. Rachel decides he'll work for 7 years for this beautiful girl that he loves. Jacob, in the same manner, is deceived by Uncle Laban. The older dresses up as the younger. Previously, the younger dressed up as the older. This is a wonderful lesson regarding reaping and sowing, karma, however you want to term it. So Jacob is deceived by Uncle Laban. And then, unfortunately, through some trickery and deceit, Jacob ends up with a second wife, plus some concubines in the process. And a war is on to see who can have the most children. And Jacob becomes kind of he gets pimped out in a strange way. It's like, I purchased you for my son's mandrakes. You will perform your duties this evening with me, for I have purchased you. That's ridiculous. Very interesting stuff. Jacob does get a bunch of kids. Jacob strikes a deal with Uncle Laban for his livestock. He's like, I want to go home. I'm taking my wives and my kids and I'm going home. He's like, no. I have learned through divination that Yah has blessed me because of you. Stay and name your wages. So they make a deal regarding how Jacob is going to get paid. And of course, that does not turn out well for Uncle Laban. He keeps trying to weasel out of the deal, changes Jacob's wages 10 times, trying to get out of this thing because he keeps getting taken advantage of, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it. And then Jacob, perceiving that the blessing, the happy countenance of Laban has faded, says, I'm bailing. Rachel steals the household gods of Laban. Laban chases them down. Rachel lies. Jacob curses Rachel, unfortunately, and says, who stole your stuff? Whoever is found with will die. Yeah, she died young. On the road, didn't get to her destination. Many people think that he basically pronounced a curse upon his own wife, unbeknownst to himself. It's a tragedy. He does make a covenant with Laban, saying, hey, here's a heap of stones. We're not going to cross over these boundaries to do any harm to each other. And then Jacob, at the end of the Torah portion, Vayetzei, meets messengers of Yah on his way back into the land. And I mentioned previously that this Torah portion is like a miniature exile. It's like a miniature exile. He has left the land and then he has returned to the land. So it's kind of seen that way. It's an interesting thing. And the next Torah portion is just astonishing. There's amazing things happening there. So there is your brief overview of Torah portions Toldot and Vayetzei. Now, I would like to start by just offering a couple of observations, okay, things to think about regarding this stuff that we've read. And then I'll open up the floor and you guys can ask any questions, comments, concerns that you have. I want to start by just sharing a brief scripture with you that kind of is the launching point for what I'd like to share with you briefly. And that is this portion from Genesis 25:27. Genesis 25:27 says that these boys, Jacob and Esau, grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. I think I would like to ask you, because I know you have some good wisdom in this regard. How would you describe the character of the two boys? What would you say regarding Jacob and Esau? I mentioned previously that the character and the spirit of these two boys is very peculiar, and it infiltrates Scripture moving forward from this point. These two nations warring in Rebekah's womb separate, and we have this prophecy that is given to her regarding the one serving the other, and all kinds of strange things. But the character of these two children is incredibly different from one another. How would you characterize those two boys? Anybody? Online or in-house, it's up to you. Osmundo, thank you for sharing, buddy. What do you got for me?
I would say Esau will be more wild, more savage. Jacob is more civil, studious, kind of more kept. That's, in a nutshell, that's what came to me.
Yep, I think that's a good insight. Anybody else?
They remind me of Cain and Abel.
Yeah, Deb is saying that they remind her a little bit of Cain and Abel. I think that's a good insight. We can see, we're starting right at the beginning, that there seems to be this dichotomy of two different kinds of people. It's obviously a continuum, but essentially there are two different kinds of people on this planet. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau. They kind of go that direction. Ella, what do you got for me?
I was just thinking, like you said, with the dichotomy, it just seems to be kind of like a comparison between the flesh and the spirit. Just
Absolutely.
things of the flesh versus things of the spirit and those characteristics.
Good. Excellent insight. Excellent insight. Yeah, to kind of to go a little bit deeper to what Ella was saying, I think you look at those words, a cunning hunter and a man of the field. It's very interesting, and we might dig into that in a moment. Danielle, I don't know if it's Danielle. Who is it? Who is it wants to talk?
That's new guy here, Nathan Zook.
Nathan
Good evening,
Zook.
sir.
I appreciate you joining us, sir. Delightful to meet you. What you want to share something with us?
Yeah, well, I found the translation that you use there, calling Jacob a plain man.
Right.
Was a little bit surprising.
Right.
It's not usually translated that way.
Right.
The Hebrew word there's tom, which is often meant perfect or complete, wholesome, sound, morally innocent.
Right.
So yeah, I was checking that real quickly there, but the link between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the flesh and the spirit, that's well attested. I mean, almost every commentator digs into that aspect of this conflict. And again, that which comes first is stronger, earthier, and meant to be overcome by that which comes later.
Yes, excellent insight. Excellent insight. Very good. When I look at Jacob and Esau, for Esau, I kind of see a restless, nomadic, crafty. When I think of hunter, it reminds me of Nimrod, because that's when we first hear that word in the Torah. A mighty hunter is Nimrod, and he's of the field. Tracy has pointed out many occasions that if you take Yeshua's parable of the field is the world. So if you say that he's a man of the field, he's a man of the world. And he's looking for excitement. He enjoys the chase. He's seeking for honor. He has a strong physical appetite. And remember that physical appetites, that's Nathan mentioned the flesh. The fleshly appetites, I think we have to always remember, is not just physical appetites like food and drink and drugs and alcohol and sex. Those are certainly powerful physical appetites, but we also need to consider intellectual fleshliness. Do you know what I mean by intellectual fleshliness? The fleshy nature of the intellect. I want to have honor. I want to be recognized as being smart and have value. What's that?
The pride of life.
Yeah, the pride of life. Absolutely.
The third one, right?
That's absolutely right. And we often forget that. We look at the flesh and we think about just physical appetites that we put in our mouth, for example. But I think the intellectual flesh is possibly even more dangerous. And it is the root, I think, in a lot of ways of some of that stuff. Now, let me back up just a little bit. You know that he's going to value what the world values. we saw that he despised his birthright, as we mentioned in the New Testament. I think Paul recognizes that. That what is the birthright, and why would he despise it? Does anybody have any insights into that? Why was he so keen to get the blessing but not the birthright? It seemed like he wouldn't care that much about the birthright, but he definitely wanted the blessing. It's not too hard to see when you hear the blessing that Isaac gives to Jacob. That sounds like a list of really great stuff. And so you kind of get a hint about why he might want that. But the text isn't real clear about why he doesn't want the birthright. I'm going to come to you in just one sec. Ella, you're up for me, sis.
I was just thinking about the difference between blessing and birthright and how the firstborn has a lot of responsibilities given to them. And I feel like someone would want all the good things, but not so much those things that are kind of a nuisance to them, or they're in the way, or it's one of the responsibilities that they need to attend to, rather than just taking what they think is rightfully theirs.
Yes, that's a delightful insight. They want the blessings, not the responsibilities. That's a good point, Ella. Thank you. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say pretty much along the same lines.
Okay.
Like, once the title, but not necessarily what comes along with that, like putting the work in or whatever else is required of it. But I was also going to go back to about the two of them, how the difference. So I was thinking, I picture like Esau being more the like burly, like manly man, like
Kind of like me.
definitely the one that he's out there and because it says he was cunning, hunter and everything. And then me and the kids were reading these together, and so then we were saying that's interesting. Jacob was a mild man remaining in the tent, so we were wondering if that was more kind of like doing things like in the home, so to speak, more soft. Like I picture Esau the hard one, and then Jacob being the softer one, the more like the mama's boy kind of.
That's a good insight, and I would hesitate to say effeminate, and I don't want to imply that.
No, I'm not saying that, but just more.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Hold that thought, because we're going to dig into
Okay.
him in just a moment. But yeah, that's a good insight. Nathan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my wife just remarked that, remember Jacob takes a stone that the whole community had to get together and move and clears a well off. He is in fact not a weak individual by any means. But note the word for tent, oh hell, right? That's a reference to the
like
tabernacle.
the tabernacle, yeah.
He's got more important things to do than run down and kill things.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, your original question about why would he despise the birthright, the language that he uses during that encounter is very weird, right? He says, I go the way of death. And people have taken that in multiple directions. I heard someone maybe 2 years ago say that, well, his father, firstborn, had been offered up as a sacrifice. And God had intervened and stopped the sacrifice. And he's like, okay, when my turn comes, is God going to intervene for me, or am I just going to get killed?
Right.
And so what good's a birthright if I'm just going to be offered up as sacrifice?
Yep.
Was an interesting take on, what that hesitancy might have been about.
Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Tracy.
I kind of just wanted to go back a little bit to the description of Esau, and like you had mentioned, the field being the world and stuff, but seeing this like narrative that's kind of from the beginning as Satan was this most cunning serpent, the most cunning beast of the field. So he's beginning this with the cunning beast of the field. Cain rose up Abel and killed him in the field, and these are all animalistic characteristics. And then Esau comes along being hairy and animalistic, and he's called this mighty or cunning hunter. And you had compared that to Nimrod. And we just did a study on, we're working on Genesis still, and talking about Nimrod being this mighty hunter and how this actually plays out in a larger scale of like the nations, these Gentile nations, these heathen nations that are like these men rising up against God's people. Hunters lie in wait, they set traps. Whereas we're called to be fishers of men, to wait patiently and draw people in. So there's a difference there. But I was thinking about Jeremiah 10:25, for example, that says, pour out your fury on the nations who do not know you and on the families who do not call on your name, for they have eaten up Jacob and devoured him. So it's like this idea of hunting and eating and devouring, and Satan roams about like a lion seeking someone to devour, and they have destroyed him and have made his dwelling desolate. So I just wanted to kind of bring that into like this idea of who Esau is and what he represents as far as God's people, Israel.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I would add to that just briefly that when you think about comparing Esau to Nimrod, according to the rabbinic interpretation of what the Tower of Babel and Babylon was all about, it was Nimrod, the idea is often put forth that Nimrod was a hunter not of animals but of men. That he wanted control over man, and that he was very good at trapping and hunting people with his words and with his persuasive ways of doing things. And he was building, and I would say this is another key element, is that remember what they were doing in Babylon. They were building a name for themselves. And this is also a characteristic of Esau, I believe, that he is interested in building a name for himself. He is not interested in building up the name of Yah, of glorifying the name of Yah, making himself low and lifting up Yah. He is interested in lifting himself up, which is building a name for yourself, building a reputation for himself. There's that intellectual and emotional flesh nature, is to want to have a name for yourself. So now looking at, how do we characterize Jacob? Well, Nate talked about this Hebrew word tam, which I had up on the screen there briefly, which is, and he was absolutely right, it means complete or whole. It's pious, sometimes referred to as pious, gentle. There's a lot of Hebrew tradition in rabbinic circles regarding what exactly Jacob was doing. Some people say he was studying a lot. He was hanging out with Shem, hanging out with the Melchizedek and the descendants of Melchizedek, and just was a scholarly type. And I think that's a fine interpretation, but I think what we are supposed to take away from it is that he's a quieter spirit, because he's a little bit more at peace between himself and the Father in heaven. However, we can't really, you're not going to have a perfect human being. Jacob is not even close to perfect. He has a better character than his brother for certain, but he is also a manipulator. He's a deal maker. He's a grasper. I mean, his name means heel, but kind of like in the expression of a heel grasper. Okay, he's a struggler. He struggled with his brother Esau, and in the next Torah portion, he's going to struggle with God in some kind of a wrestling match with an angel or the angel of the Lord or God himself. We're not totally certain, but what's an interesting thing to think about as you read the next Torah portion is he thinks he's wrestling with his brother, but he's not. He's wrestling with God. It's an interesting thing there. But he is still infected with an instinct to use what I would call alternate means to get the blessing. And I'll talk with you about that briefly. So, acquiring blessings by alternate means. I want to say a word about this, okay? We all of us want the blessings of Yah. And they are all delineated in chapter 27, I believe, of Deuteronomy. We all want life and health. We want wealth, or at least enough money to survive. We want good relationships. We want children who are happy and healthy and strong and that also follow God. We want honor. That goes back to the intellectual desires of our hearts. We want to be honored. We want people, want to have a good reputation. Okay. What we have to recognize is that these are all good things that Yah desires for each of us to have. However, these good things are simply the blessings of obedience. And right from the beginning in the garden, we see that do you think that our Father wanted Adam and Chava to be like him? Of course they did. Of course he did. He wants us to be like him. But through a rigorous process, and oftentimes painful process. But see, the adversary comes along and says, I can show you a way to get the blessings without having to do the hard work. And our culture, especially in America, is infiltrated up to the here with an easier way to do anything. You know, it's interesting to me that is the issue that we are continuously faced with, is wanting the blessings. All of us in our base nature strongly desire the blessings of Yah, but we don't often want to do the work of being obedient to him. That's the only way to get it. We're much more interested in finding a shortcut, finding an easier way to do it. And there are tons of them out there, tons of ways to do it. So blessings only come from obedience. And I think this is the dichotomy that separates a true person of Yah from a person who is building a name for themselves. A descendant of Isaac versus a descendant of Esau, if you will. Okay? We who are of the spirit, of the nature of Jacob, we calmly do our business and take what comes. We aren't grasping, struggling, running around looking for the next thing, looking for something that's going to fulfill us. We are doing our business. We are doing the tasks that have been assigned to us, calmly doing our business and taking what comes. Okay, we should strive to serve better and let him provide the results of our service. In my business, for example, I talk to a lot of people, and people come to me to help them out. I'm a service-based business, a consultant, and they pay me to help them. So I have to remember that I always have to remind myself that there's no trick that I'm going to be able to perform. There's no extra hoops that I need to jump through. I need to do what I need to do every day, and Father is going to put people in front of me as an opportunity of someone to help. And I have to say to myself, I'm going to do my best to present myself and my services to this person. And then I have to stop. Once I have presented who I am and how I can help you, I have to shut up. And I have to wait to see, is Yah going to close that door or open that door? And I can tell you this for a fact. Every time I have become fearful, and remember that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, FOMO, the fear of missing out, is what drives so much sin. I have a potential client that I'm going to talk to, and I want that client's business. And I become fearful, am I going to have enough money? I really want that guy's business. And you know what? It happens to me almost every single time I have tried it. If I let it go and it comes back, it's good. If I chase it, it turns out bad every single time. I can sometimes make that deal work by pushing, maybe offering something a little bit better. Those are the clients that you do not want to work with. God was telling me right up front, hey, All you have to do is present the information. If they decide they want to work with you, I'm bringing that person to you. If you need to make a special offer a discount, kind of use some kind of strategy or some kind of clever words to try and convince this person to work with you, you've screwed it up. That is not going to work, okay? I don't need you to manipulate. It's like Jacob. I'm putting up rods that I peeled the bark off of, and that's why the sheep are producing... No. Yah says, no, that wasn't you. That was me causing the sheep that were going to be inherited by you to be speckled, spotted, and blah, blah, blah. You didn't do that. What you thought you were doing that by peeling the bark off of trees and putting them in the water. What were you thinking? I don't know what you were doing, but it certainly was not you that was causing these sheep to multiply. But we go astray when we violate the instructions to get what we want. For example, we've seen this in these Torah portions, these last several Torah portions. We go down to Egypt when we weren't told to go there. We take a second wife when the first one won't conceive. We use another's weakness to take advantage of them, like giving them a bowl of stew in exchange for their birthright. We pretend to be something we're not, like Esau. We change the employee's wages 10 times, like Uncle Laban. We steal the household gods. Our father has devoured our inheritance. We're taking the household gods because we don't know that Jacob's God is going to take care of us. We want... there are very interesting things regarding the teraphim of the house of Laban, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It's quite fascinating stuff. However, Rachel was clearly grasping and fearful. So here's my challenge to you, and then I'll stop talking and let you guys, tell me what you got. You have to be a good employee. I was having a wonderful conversation with Angela at our Bible study this morning. And we talked about being a good employee or being a good servant of God. What does a bad employee always do? He's worried about what the other workers are doing. He's like, well, that dude ain't working as hard as me. You remember the when Yeshua was like hiring these people to work in the field? They all knew how long everybody worked, right? These people only work for an hour. They got the same pay. Then you've also got... here's the worst. A bad employee is always considering and discussing the wisdom and efficacy of management. It's like, did you see what the boss did? The boss is always an idiot to a bad employee. When you're talking trash about the boss, and we all do it. The boss is the one who is steering the company. Presumably he knows what he's doing, but it's a bad employee who is always wondering, why did the boss implement this policy? That was stupid. He's tearing down the boss. He's second guessing the boss. He's looking around at what the other employees are doing. He's concerned about how much money he's making is compared to the other employees. He is doing everything but what he should be doing, which is what has been assigned to him. This is your task. You don't worry about anything else around you. Don't worry about why the boss gave you that task. Don't worry about the boss you think you've got. I'm going to tell you a brief story. When I was young, I went to visit Angela's parents, and her dad ran a company, and he was like, her dad is very particular about the way he wants things done. And I was an arrogant and foolish young man. And he said, I want you to do this job exactly like that. And I said, okay. And then, of course, being a smarty pants, I figured, you know what? I think I can do that job in half the time if I just do this. Well, I went ahead and did that. And the boss came back a little later and said, I see that this happened. Let me tell you why that happened. Because you didn't follow the procedure that I set up precisely because I made that mistake years ago. And I know my business. And I know what is right and I know what is wrong. I don't tell you to do these things because I want to make it hard on you. It's because it's the way it needs to be done, or it's going to break. And I'm concerned about my customers. When now you've caused all kinds of problems. I've paid you to do this job. I now have to pay you to do it again. If you don't have time to do it right the first time, when are you going to have time to do it again? Okay. Now I can't deliver this product on time to my client. I would not If I were a shiesty business person, I might just give the inferior product to my client, but I won't do that. Okay, so I learned a valuable lesson, but not that day. I can tell you, because I was arrogant and I didn't understand. It took me years to figure out, okay, I understand what her dad was telling me.
After you became a boss.
After I became the boss, that's correct. After I became the boss is when I learned that lesson of employees not doing what they're told because you've already run across all these problems. See, our Father in heaven knows the correct way to do things, and we get into our minds that we're going to do it a different way, a faster way, a better way, a cheaper way, whatever. So that's what it to me is about being a good employee of our master. He has given us exactly what he wants us to do. And I think, unfortunately, our forefathers in the church have given us a rather mixed message that is, you're not really serving God until you are a missionary or a pastor or an elder or something like that. And it's unfortunate because they've denigrated the most important jobs, which is a mother, a wife, a husband, a father. Those are more important. Those are more important jobs. Those are more elevated jobs. However, they don't come with as much fanfare, as much public acclamation. They don't come with a whole lot of, I hope that as a husband, you're giving your wife praise for being a good wife and a good mother. I hope that as a wife, you're giving your husband praise for being a good provider and a good dad and a good husband. I hope that you are a good husband. I hope that you are a good wife. So that is our job. Most of us have that job. And it's an incredibly critical job. And I think, unfortunately, that us as Christians have failed at that job for some time now. And that's why our culture, the wagon wheels have come off of our culture, is because, unfortunately, we got distracted by a cheaper, faster, easier way to live. We bought into the materialism of this culture that we're living in, and we decided that there were certain things that were more important than being a father, certain things that were more important than being a mother, a husband, a wife. And we are suffering the consequences of it. And now we have to rebuild. Now we have to start over. Now we have to build it up again. So those are my comments. I will open the floor to anyone else who would comment on what I said or would comment on something entirely different. Osmundo.
What you were saying, piggybacking off of what you were saying about ministry of, being a father, a husband and, wife and mother. I think I got a deeper understanding of Yah as being a father. When you're disciplining your children, when you have to have that delicate balance between discipline and rewarding, when to have compassion, when to draw the line and put your foot down. And sometimes it's not easy. And when you learn the balance, then you think of your relationship with the Almighty, when you mess up, when you want that compassion, when you want that grace and mercy, or when you get that spanking, when you got out of line and, okay, I deserve that, So I think understanding Yah, the best way to understand Yah is when you're an earthly father, you see that dynamic between you and your children, and it understands that relationship between you and the Father in heaven.
100%, Osmundo. I will agree with you 100% that when I became a father, I learned a lot about our Father in heaven when I became a father, and particularly when I became a father of sons who got a little older. That was not quite as much when they were small kids, but as they began to grow and have opinions of their own, that's when I started to learn about the patience of our Father. And it was a very good, I'm still learning that, frankly. Anyone else?
Hey, Alan, I have
Yeah, grab a mic.
You said Deuteronomy 27, but it's Deuteronomy 21. When you get into the birthright, it's Hebrew 1062, and the blessing is 1293.
Okay.
And the way I look at it is the birthright is the right to rule, and that First Chronicles 5:2, you can see that. And that right to rule, like something happens to the father. And Abraham kind of was the first one who rightly ruled over his family. And then there's blessings like Acts talked about it.
Right.
But rulership goes two ways. You know, the family has to acknowledge the position in, you know, a Yah type, I don't like to say godly, but a family that observes that rulership, they'll have the blessings.
Yeah.
And you and your household shall be saved. But if they don't, because what's happening in America, there's usurping of the father's position by women.
Yeah.
And it's awful. It's demonic.
Well, you know, yeah, it's a good insight, and there's quite an interesting resurgence happening with young men in America right now. You can see it happening all over the place. That young men are quite confused about their roles.
Mm-hmm.
They have unfortunately been emasculated.
Absolutely.
And they're having to, like I said, many of us learning to become true men. We didn't exactly know what it was. And, you know, we all thought it was kind of interesting and funny when we were watching The Simpsons back in the 90s. And Homer Simpson is a blundering idiot. You know, this is where it starts, is with culture portraying the father. Every single father in every show on television was a complete idiot, and the mom was the one who was strong and holding it all together. And that really destroyed manhood for a generation of people. And that is nothing to say about a woman being strong, but a man being weak was very much highlighted and emphasized, and it was really bad. It was really bad for our culture. I just thought it was cute at the time, but now I look back on that and I think, oh my gosh, terrible tragedy. Yeah, good insight. But I think, unfortunately, us men are kind of having to learn, starting over, starting fresh, and figuring out what does it mean to be a man of God who is leading the family. But I saw a lot of men who were in the church who thought that they were men of God. What they were doing was wielding a hammer and saying, I'm the head. That was bad. I saw bad stuff happening when a man perceives himself to be something that he is not. And he's, you know what's interesting to me? The men that I have known in my life who had that attitude of, I'm the head of the household, every single one of them had a very warped sense of themselves, and they were terrified. They were weak men. They were afraid. They were ruled by fear. I don't know exactly what was the source of that fear. It was a fear of abandonment. It was a fear of loss. Maybe I think that they were like most men and realized, I don't feel like I'm a real man, but if I let anybody know that I don't feel like a real man, I'm going to lose everything I have. And so I have to pretend to be a real man. A real man a weak man pretending to be a real man is a dangerous, dangerous thing. Angela, I have a microphone for you.
Could she toss it back? I was going to say, in the tail on to what you said, what it means biblically to be a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
That the way you were describing that man sounded like an Esau in your Jacob and Esau comparison, because it's a cornered animal that is the most dangerous. It's an animal who's afraid, who's the most likely to lash out and hurt people. And that kind of describes the man you were talking about.
It describes many of the men that I have counseled over the years who were in that situation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Men of the world, you know, they're physically going to lash out and attack and cause harm. So a man of Yah, Genesis 18:19, for I have known him so that he commands his children, his household after him, to guard the way of Yahuwah, to do righteousness and right ruling, so that Yahuwah brings to Abraham what he's spoken to him. And then 1 Kings 2, verse 2, I am going the way of all the earth, and you shall be strong and be a man, and guard the charge of Yahuwah, your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to guard his laws, his commands, his right rulings, and his witnesses, as it is written in the Torah Moshe, so that you do wisely all that you do and wherever you turn. So that's how Shlomo or Solomon was given the obedient heart, the heart Shema, which he had asked, and then he gave him everything, wisdom and everything.
Yep, absolutely. Good insight. Good insight. I think, being a real man means being a servant, putting yourself aside for the sake of your wife and children or the people around you, whoever it is that you're serving. Humble, humility. Yeah. You're serving Yah, and you're doing so by instructing your house as much as you can. And I think what can be worse is if you're and this is where the hypocrisy will destroy it every single time. If you're trying to instruct your children to be a godly man and you are not a godly man, that is a recipe for disaster. They will not follow you. And your children can see right through you. Yeah. You ain't fooling nobody, pretending to be a Christian, and your kids they know you better than anybody on Sunday does. Yeah. Tracy,
I was just listening to Grant Newton talk about.
Sorry, hold on, Tracy. I just wanted to say, if you want to raise godless children, tell them how to be godly people and don't do it yourself. You'll just raise a bunch of godless heathen. Sorry, go ahead.
That's good. I was just listening to Grant Luton this week talk about Ephesians 5, which is, husbands love your wives as Messiah loved the called out ones. And that's where it says, wives submit yourselves to your husbands. But before it says that, it says submit yourselves to one another. So this is something that we, I think, tend to gloss over, that wives and husbands are supposed to submit to one another. And then wives submit to your husband. He is the head of the house. And then he goes on and love your wives like Messiah loved the assembly. So it's very easy to see Messiah did not rule over his people with an iron rod. And Grant had this really good image of a man holding an umbrella. And if you want to be under that authority, the wife would come under that umbrella. And that's like Messiah, under his wing, under the shadow of his wing. It's a very good place to be if the one holding that authority is doing so in a lawful and godly manner. It's a very beautiful thing of safety and security and service to one another.
Yep. That is a great image, and I enjoy that quite a bit. A man is holding an umbrella over his family. That's a great insight. Who is it? It's Osmundo. What's up, buddy?
I think Yeshua summed it up the best. He said, "Let the greatest among you be the servant." Right. And as a husband, as a father, oftentimes your dignity, if from the worldview, can take a hit. And being that strength doesn't always look like an iron hand. Being that strength is being humble, being submissive, not necessarily like the wife ruling over you, but being submissive to Jehovah. And when you're doing that, you're allowing that tenderness, but yet that strength to be demonstrated. And like the word says, the goodness of Jehovah bring a man to repentance. So as men, are we strong enough to be vulnerable?
Yeah. Tough. That's tough, man. It's tough. Nathan.
Are you familiar with the book, The Garden of Peace?
By Rabbi Shalom Arush?
Yes.
I am.
Sounds like it. Okay. So for those of you who've not heard of this teaching, he basically creates two books based off what his rabbi told him, that the only way to expect success in a marriage is for each partner to accept 100% responsibility for making it happen. But he splits very pointedly his book in two. I was terrified. Well, it took me 3 rounds and some really rough situations in my marriage to finally get enough humility worked into me to actually be able to read his book through. And then I was terrified of my wife reading, because if anybody talks to my wife like that, it ain't working. That's just, but finally some friends who had encouraged me again to go back to the book, like, no, the woman's book is different. I said, okay, good.
Yeah. I remember from that book that he said, do not under any circumstances let your wife get a hold of this book.
For multiple reasons. For multiple reasons. But I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, there are a couple of things about it. Number one, the book is really, really Jewish, and having been raised a completely in evangelical Christian background, it took me a few rounds just to even be able to handle the approach of teaching that he was using, let alone what he was saying, which
Very difficult. For
yeah,
for those,
it's kind of funny because when my daughter, so we had God's blessed us with 2 girls, and now we got grandbabies, which is why we're down here. But they get in some fuss with each other, and I take one of them aside and I talk to them about what they were doing wrong, and all they want to do is talk about the other one. And I'm like, okay, look, I'm not talking to them, I'm talking to you about what you. Now, why it took me all that strain to understand that God treats me the same way? Oh.
Yeah, believe me, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking
But
about.
survival in the marriage depends on accepting that.
It does.
At least in my case.
I think, thank you for sharing that, Nathan. And I don't know if those of you in the house or online have heard about or read this book, The Garden of Peace by Rabbi Shalom Arush. It's an amazing book. It is very Jewish. It absolutely is very strictly rabbinic, Hasidic, Judaistic. Very good stuff, though. I read the book with my teenage sons when they were younger. And it is all about what a man should be for his wife and how he should treat his wife. And there are amazing, very, very different perspective than what you would get in a marriage counseling book in Christianity. Very different. You want to look at being the epitome of a true servant to your wife. That's what that book is about. It is about you sacrificing every single bit of yourself for your wife. And I have been a strong advocate for the book. There's only a very couple of areas in that book that I read, and I was like, man, that is really hard for me to get my head around. But even then, the boys and I talked about it, and we could disagree with him in a couple of areas. But Tracy was talking about Grant Luton. Grant Luton wrote a book of his own that is very, very similar to Rabbi Shalom Arush's book. It's very, very similar. Same exact concept. And I think
He didn't write it, though.
Who didn't?
Grant didn't write it. It was somebody that wanted to be anonymous, and
okay.
He did the forward or
didn't
something
he?
like that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I think Grant, if I remember, Grant actually pointed out that it borrowed heavily from Rabbi Shalom Arush.
Yeah, I honestly, once I finally got my head around it enough to read all the way through and start to try to apply it, I immediately had this strong urge to take the book and translate it into Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that the whole point here, the most important point is that if you, as a husband, your primary task is to provide for everything that I am mostly interested in hearing from my wife exactly what do you want from me. Now, of course, you as a man know, and I'll make a sexist joke. Are you ready? Here it comes. You're supposed to intuit these things. She's not going to tell you. I'm just kidding. But no, if you can discover exactly what your wife wants and make it your mission to give it to her, you will be happily, happily married. And if your wife will simply ask you, because you got no problem just telling her exactly what you want, because that's what a man does, he'll tell you exactly what he wants. And if you will make it your mission to give him what he wants, but you see, that's the terrible thing about a marriage that has gone awry, is that we withhold from each other because we're like, you're not going to give me what I want, I ain't giving you what you want, and then we're cutting off our noses to spite our faces, and it turns ugly. But if we, as godly husbands and wives, were to say, I am genuinely interested in understanding what do you want as a wife, let me give it to you. And you reserve the right to change your mind. You can come back a couple of years later and go, you know what? I thought I wanted that. I do not. I'm changing my mind. No problem. You're the boss of you. You get to tell me exactly what you want, and it's my job to give it to you. And I reserve the right to change my mind. I'm going to say, I used to think that I wanted that, but you know what? I don't. I changed my mind. I changed my heart. I don't know. God changed my heart. Who knows what changed my heart, but it's different now. And imagine what that is. That's a real marriage. When I am only interested, that's what Tracy was talking about a moment ago. The husband does not have authority over his own body. The wife does not have, we are genuinely interested in serving one another. You got yourself a glorious marriage, man. You got yourself a glorious marriage when each is genuinely seeking to serve the other. Osmundo, what's the word on the street?
Well, I started laughing. I know y'all saw the emoticon of me laughing because Al and I were just talking about this book a few days ago in the discussion. And just to reiterate what we discussed or just parts of it, you have to have the even playing field when these books have the advice of, the submission, because in this culture, we have, unfortunately, feminism has taken over and even have infiltrated the church. And so you have, whether you have a man who's trying to be submissive to, his wife or vice versa, if the other person is bent upon, I would say, having authority over the other one or being more domineering or being controlling, then it makes having that godly approach a lot more difficult, because you're putting yourself in a submissive position for under somebody who's already trying to usurp authority or trying to be dominant. So, and me and Alan were talking and, joking about this, because where do you draw the line biblically when you have those dynamics to where there's not the biblical heart in that. It's more so the world has infiltrated that marriage or that relationship, but one person's trying to be godly, the other one's worldly, and now there's an imbalance of powers. So now the mission is no longer an option, because now you're more on the defense as opposed to trying to serve. So, and I always made this analogy: you never see anybody trying to make a picnic on a battlefield, right? So you have to, where does that line come in? So it has to be a place where the playing field is even and it's level. That's where what the word is talking about in Ephesians, where husband, love your wife, but if the wife is not being lovable and not outside of, I know when they say love people who are not lovable, but when you're outside of that, when you're entering into worldly kind of attitudes, or operating in a worldly manner, then where does that line get drawn? You see what I'm saying?
That's a good insight, and I'll tell everybody kind of what my opinion is, and I told this to Osmundo when we were talking the other day, and I've told it to many men. Here's what I think that Yah is calling us to, that Yeshua is calling us to. If you want to be a real husband that is self-sacrificial, like Messiah gave himself for his bride, you love a woman who gives you nothing. Isn't that what we do to Yeshua all day, every day? He loves and sacrifices himself for a bride who is whoring, is not really interested in what he wants. So you want to be a husband. I have always told men this who are coming to me and struggling with their marriages. They're like, my wife doesn't do this and that and the other thing. And I say, you know what I tell them? I don't care what your wife does. It's not my business what your wife does. My business is what you do. You love, you give. Well, no, she ain't got to do nothing, buddy. Did you sign up to serve her only if she serves you? That's not a marriage. Serve. Love, give her everything that she wants and expect nothing in return. Can you do that? I've never met a man who can. Not yet. I've been counseling men for years, and they all come to me with the same problems. My wife doesn't A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I don't care what your wife doesn't give you. Osmundo was talking about a woman who is an unbeliever. Well, Paul told us about that too. He said, if the woman consents to live with you, God has called us to peace. Of course, he's not suggesting that you should be unequally yoked and marry an unbeliever, But what he's saying is maybe you were already married to an unbeliever and you yourself were an unbeliever and now she's an unbeliever and you're not. God has called us to peace. Stay married if you can be at peace. Now that's very, very hard to do. But men could save marriages by truly leading, by saying, I'm going to love and give sacrificially to my wife, even if she gives me nothing. My opinion is that if you will commit to doing that in longer than just 2 weeks, which is what most men will do, if they take my advice at all, they'll do it for a couple of weeks and go, see, it didn't work. It's like, no. I'm saying give and do not stop. I personally believe that once she can get over he's just doing this to trick me, he hasn't really changed. She's just being really nice for the next 7 to 10 days. If you can get past that, it's really hard to it's really hard to treat someone badly who is just totally self-sacrificial to you. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying to husbands, if you will give sacrificially to your wives, they cannot help but give to you. But they're not going to do it within 2 weeks because they don't trust you. You haven't been self-sacrificial. Once they see that you're genuine and that you just keep doing it, I think things change. Things turn around. Tracy, I'm coming to you in just a moment. Go ahead.
I think that, I haven't too much of a place to say much about this, but I feel like
people should know that there is a young man speaking who is not yet married, and he is about to pontificate on the subject of marriage. Just heads up.
Disclaimer, everything I say is untrue. Anyway, I don't know if it's great to try to give everything kind of to somebody without expecting anything, especially if in a marriage. It seems like you should want something in return. You should be negotiating for that, because if you just give and you don't want to, if you don't expect to receive, I feel like you get resentful eventually. Like you would eventually
will. If your heart is not tender, you will.
But I don't think that that's something you should strive for. You can strive like, oh, let me just not make my heart tender. I feel like you should kind of like.
You never start there.
Yeah, you never start there. That's right.
You're looking at it from a scenario of, I'm going into it. You've already made a covenant.
Right.
So you're in bondage now. You're tied together. You're one. So it's not you don't have a choice.
That's true.
You shouldn't.
And
about whether to go in, to keep in, or to go out. Yeah.
Well, then you're breaking your part of the covenant.
If I leave.
If you in your most marriage vows,
Mm-hmm.
so that you will love, care for, treat, right?
Yeah.
All those things 1 Corinthians tells us to do. And you made that part of your vow, and that's what I did when I got married. So just because she doesn't do it,
doesn't let you off the hook.
I'm still accountable to my side of the covenant. You would still be accountable to your side of the covenant, regardless of whether she is or not. Otherwise, we're up a creek without a paddle, because we don't keep to our part of the covenant with God, right? But Christ does. He's keeping his covenant with us, even though we whore around and we put more time in this and that instead of him. So it's hard and it's not enjoyable to go after somebody and pursue somebody that's not pursuing you, but that's your part of the covenant. That's on you. This is kind of what your dad's saying, is that's on you. That's not on them.
Yeah, and I think, Evan, that you are looking at it from a unique perspective of a young man who is seeking to get married. Okay, so yeah, you would not hopefully go into a situation like that expecting, I'm going to serve this person and she's going to give me nothing. No, don't do that.
Yeah. But it seems like you should.
You need to have a meeting of the minds. I'm mostly talking to us men who have been married for quite a while, and there's always marriage troubles and people fighting and trying to get along. I would give but a little bit of a nuanced take to a young man who's considering marriage or is freshly married.
But I think that the point is that we shouldn't be searching to lose for ourselves and then win, like have the other person win over us. I feel like goal is to have everybody win, where it's not just that you're sacrificing yourself and you get to say, oh, woe is me, I'm giving everything to her. It's now everybody's benefiting from this. It's not a bad situation for you.
Right. You are absolutely correct. You are correct, sir. You should go into it seeking to have a mutually servant type of relationship with your wife. I'm simply saying to men who that scenario has gone awry, how we can fix it. That's the advice that I'm giving. I'm going to go to Tracy first because she is so patient.
So I think a good way to look at this is not just for men, but for anyone. Our goal should be to walk as he walked, act like the Messiah. So if you keep that narrative in your head, people will be naturally drawn to that. And Messiah also didn't go and chase down people when they said, oh, I don't want to follow you anymore. He looked to his disciples and says, you want to go too? So he didn't cease being who he was, and I've taken that to heart. Like, we can only change ourselves. We can't change other people. So if I don't like the behavior of people around me, I seek to change myself to draw them closer to the light, kind of thing. And especially with my child, like, I want her to want to be near me, but if I'm acting like me, she's not gonna want to be near me. She's gonna be like, you're a spaz, you're crazy, or whatever. But if I'm acting like the Messiah, she's going to want to be near me. She's going to want to come around me because that love is there and that light and that goodness. So I think that's a good way to maybe look at it from a husband point of view.
Good insight. Good insight. Nathan. You are muted, sir. You got to unmute yourself.
With much effort. I think it was like 6 hits, I think, to make that happen. So yeah, one of the fortunate things not being in the room, I'm pretty sure all the longer married men were just grinning from ear to ear at the conversation earlier there. Certainly when one is approaching marriage, you want to have a deep and serious shared conversation, shared goals about where you're going in life and what you expect the marriage to be like, to be close enough. A little preview though. Don't expect any of it to actually happen that way. God's much bigger than we are in this regard. But as Alan mentioned and others as well, the model here is Messiah and God. And you want to, if we're really doing our job, the conditions that we put on our love are the same that He puts on His. It's so easy to say, especially before I got married. And in practice,
It's a little
still
different.
practicing.
Yeah,
Still practicing.
That's a good insight, Nathan. I appreciate that. So yeah, he's absolutely right. Gabby, you're up, sister. What do you got for me?
Just since we're on this conversation, we kind of went off the Torah portion, which is what you told us to not do. But
I see that you are a rule follower, Gabby.
This conversation just reminded me of the story of Hosea and, how he just kept taking back his wife, even though she was going, behind his back over and over and over again. So.
Yep. I'm glad that you said that because I think I mentioned that to Osmundo when we were having a talk the other day. I brought up Hosea and his poor wife, Gomer. Well, poor Hosea dealing with his wife, Gomer. That was a challenging circumstance where she was, God told her, this is a beautiful metaphor of father in his congregation. Just keep loving her, even though she's doing crazy, stupid stuff. Just keep loving her. Really tough to do as a man. Really tough to do. Yeah, and trying not to have a root of bitterness. That's a really good insight. And I would say, Gabriella, in my defense of having allowed this conversation to go off the rails, it is related to the Esau nature of a man to cut off his nose to spite his face. And it is of the nature of Jacob, bringing this around full circle, that to be a servant. Now, I'm not suggesting that Jacob was a perfect servant because he certainly wasn't. And I think I'll wrap up with this. Father is not asking any of us for perfection. There is the only difference between the good and the bad is the good are trying and the bad are not. That's it. The good are trying and the bad are not. They're not trying, they're just going along. They're just doing what everybody else is doing. Where the good, and no one is good, are just mindful of how messed up they are. And they're trying to make a little... I pray with my wife every day, Father, could you help me to be just a little bit better than I was yesterday? And I'm talking a little tiny bit. I ain't asking for much, because I know that I can't bootstrap this thing. You can't bootstrap righteousness. That ain't how it works. I'm still not 100% clear on how it does work. Frankly, to tell you the truth, I mean, I think that God bless our brothers and sisters in Christianity are talking about how the Holy Spirit's going to take over your life and make you better. Well, in a sense, that is true. But if you kind of take your hands off the steering wheel and give it over to the Holy Spirit, you're going to run into a ditch. So there's some kind of a combined effort between you and the Father. And Mike and I have talked about this a couple of times, and he and I agree on this, and I think we're right, but we could be wrong. At least I'm willing to admit it. I'm sure Mike is. That we think that what Father really wants from us is to start. Make some effort. If you'll just get the car moving, he will help you steer it. If you'll just start the process, it's called the Paraclete, the helper, for a reason. This is the Holy Spirit. A helper. What's a helper? A helper doesn't do the work for you. You get started and the helper comes along to give you that help that you need. So that's my perspective on it. I really appreciate your patience. I know that it is late on the East Coast for many of you. Many blessings for hanging in there with us. Great conversations with you guys as normal. I love talking with you guys. You're all very good students of the Word, and I appreciate your wisdom and insight that you share with all of us each time. I hope that you will enjoy the remainder of your Shabbat. We're gonna, if Yah wills it, we will live and meet again next week to go on to our next Torah portion. And we'll only have to do one that week and not two. So maybe I'll be teaching, and we'll open up a Q&A session at the end for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Is everyone okay? It's all good? Excellent. Let us pray.